Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome to another episode of Cellar Door Skeptics. Didn't quite get Hanna on that intro there, as I usually do. Usually I get to kind of mill him on that, and he kind of goes, "Oh, didn't know you were starting," but he could tell. It must be because I raised my hands or something. I want to apologize real quick to everybody. Last week was a very chaotic week, and I'll be honest with you.
Don't say.
I had the episode queued, already uploaded everything. I just didn't hit publish, and so it sat on my computer for 3 days. And I will apologize because, last week was Memorial Day weekend.
Your birthday.
It was my birthday weekend. We had celebrations for my brother's birthday, and we had preparations for my brother's graduation and his graduation party that all took place. And so I want to apologize because I think I put the episode out on Thursday or Friday. I was like, oops. So I did not mean to do that. Very sorry for any of the Patreons. I'll hold off hitting this episode until a couple of days or something like that to try and space the two episodes out. If you aren't a supporter of Patreon, you should go over to Patreon, support us at Patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics, and we will be happy to take the donations. We donate to charities every year, as well as our own money as well. So we don't keep the money. I don't think any of this money has ever actually gone into either one of our pockets. It essentially
It's for the website hosting and our subscription fees, so that we can basically have all the hours and stuff. Like, you got to pay for all the memory online and all that good stuff.
Exactly. So before we begin, though, this show, usually we start off with like a bit of news or something like that. I want to start off with something called good news, right? So I'm gonna tell a little.
Real?
Yeah, it is.
Good news is a real thing.
Yeah, I feel positive tonight, and
I
maybe it's only because
seen any of that since 2015.
There's always a little bit of silver lining, right? And maybe it's because we're a little bit more privileged, so we see some of these things that other people don't see. But I think if we all stop, to take a second and reflect on different things in our lives, we can see some of the some of the awesome things that are happening. And, so for example, the good news for me was, I'm 36 years young, right? So there's that. I started working out again, mostly because my doctor told me I had to. So there's that. So hopefully that'll help me to lower my heart rate, so that I can live longer, so that I can yell into this microphone for a little bit longer. My brother graduated high school. He got accepted into Western. He's now going to Western for music therapy, which is not a woo-woo science field, though I did ask that question. So those are some of the good things that happened to me this week. Hey, Hannah, what good things happened to you?
It was a pretty hectic week. I'm in the middle of job interviews right now. We decided to shut the company down. We announced it a while ago, as far as all of our customers. So, like, I was kind of worried that I was out of engineering specifically for too long, out of college, to really be of any value or use. And I've had some pretty good responses, and it seems like I'm a useful and wanted human that will be able to make trinkets and draw pictures. So it's been a good week. And then we've done some photo shoots with my wife's company and stuff. So I get to basically hold 2 children, 2 dogs. We never take the cat anywhere, but if we did, I'm sure he would be stuck to my head or something. but there was a dog park that opened downtown, and we managed to get a picture of. My wife took a photo of me, including all of the brood, and it's just it's enjoyable to be able to do stuff with my family, and so hopefully there's the work and everything, the job interviews clear up my schedule so that I can spend more time with the family, but also I can do more stuff with here because I am definitely limited in my abilities as far as the things that I've been able to do. Like we're just so busy. I don't know if it's a side effect of being mid-30s or if it's just the middle class life being crammed even tighter and tighter every single day with work and then just packing in as much life as you can.
Yeah, well, that's fair. It is nice that you get to be able to spend a little bit more time with your family.
Yeah.
It does suck having to shut your own business down. I mean, that's never an easy thing, and it's not something, anybody likes to have to do. But
well, it's interesting because I'll see what it's like to work for someone. I've never done it before. I've always worked for Dad. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it'll be an interesting experience. And like everybody that I've talked to that has said, they basically said that, you don't have to do this forever. Like if you come work for us in 5 years and you decide you need to move on or you need to go somewhere else, your kids want to go to a different school or whatever, you can do that. So I'm not looking at anything in like the permanent situation. I mean, there could be a relocation in my future. I really don't know, but if 5 years isn't that long, maybe I'd come back to the west side, or maybe something else would come along, and we would keep stepping up and stepping up. So it's going to be an interesting experience. I do think seeing a little bit more of the world will be beneficial to me. I have gone a few places, but working for an international company or something, maybe I'll see the whole planet. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, that's always fun. I'm a little jealous. Some people at my work got to go to Italy, though I think it's a pointless trip, and of course I didn't get invited. And I was like, hey, don't you need a project manager to go with you? No. Well, you might, because I always tell the wife the first place in Europe I get to go to, as long as it's not like as long as it's not Iraq or Indonesia or some weird, even Indonesia I might take her to, but as long as it's not like Iraq or Iran or something like that, which nobody really wants to go visit. But
yeah, well, I mean, I would love to see Baghdad and Constantinople and those kinds of places, but they're just so dangerous.
Yep, not me. I'm okay without that. But I always told her if I ever get sent to Italy or France or Germany or England, I was like, we will figure out how to find the money, and you can come with me. But I did not get selected, cool. And they laughed basically at me when I offered to go.
That sucks.
Because if
I get a job for a big giant German company, I might be able to go to Austria or Germany, so that'd be cool.
Yeah, there you go. Well, tonight the first topic we wanted to have a conversation about was essentially buying back stocks, right? And so there was a CNBC article essentially that talked about the stock market would be much better if companies stopped buying back their own shares. And if you remember
more accurate.
Yeah. If you remember what happened how many years ago, people were selling shares. People are doing that to, pay out dividends to take money because some of the stock market was crashing. People didn't want to own all their own shares. Companies do it for other reasons as well. And here now, and this is what was predicted, is if way back in the day, Trump was to give some sort of actual stipend back to businesses to give them a tax reduction, they would then spend the money to purchase their own stocks back, which seems kind of insane, don't you think? I mean, that seems a little silly, but obviously companies are doing it because it does a lot for their bottom line.
Yeah, the whole point is that the tax returns, so the new tax plan would cut corporate tax rates, and so they wouldn't be spending the money on taxes, and that money would trickle down to the workers. It would trickle down to investments into infrastructure, and I mean the utopia would be unleashed, and all of the good things would happen. Whatever that whole idea, and so this is what people like you and I said would happen, as these companies would not invest their money in people and they would not invest their money in infrastructure. What did they do? They bought back stocks that they had issued, which in what it does is essentially you're taking your own money, buying back pieces of your own company. And so what it does is it drives up your bottom line and makes your company look much better because all your stocks have increased in value. because there's less of them. It's just plain and simple. This is simple economics. And on top of that, that the people who are stock owners and the people who own these stocks, everybody's getting dividends and returns on this. And so the number of people in this country who have stocks it's like significant investment in stocks is something like 10%. And so this is obviously benefiting a very small group of people right out of the gate. 401ks and stuff like that for retirement, some people have, and those can be tied in through different index funds and whatever. But on average, people that are going to be making big bucks and people are going to be benefiting from stock buybacks are going to be people who have connections and investments in stocks. So there's twofold here that this is making companies look better. And it says Ned Davis Research shows that the S&P 500 would be 19% lower between 2011 and 2019's first quarter without these buybacks. What it does is 19%. So we're at 25,000 right now for the Dow, but the S&P, I can't remember what the S&P was at. But in the end, what you're looking at is all of this stuff that everybody says like, oh, the economy is doing so great. And what do? They talk the Dow, they talk the S&P. And if those numbers aren't as high, then we don't have that pseudo metric that the economy is doing so great. What we should be talking about is GDP and deficit versus income, and all of those things are standard measures that would be good. And all of these things have been shown that economists look at and they say, yeah, the economy is doing good, but if you could take away these buybacks, it would basically show you what the real economy is looking like. And 19% lower is a pretty significant margin when you're claiming that this is the greatest economy in history, when we're seeing income inequality just as strong as it was during Great Depression era times. And this is I call this cooking the books, like Enron got in trouble for. That's what this feels like to me.
Yeah, except for this is legal. So I'm going to – there's a couple of points I wanted to make. One is that while I understand your point about, inflating the market, I don't think this is anything new. I think this has been happening for so many years, and I don't think it matters who's in office, personally. I think buybacks are something that's a universal trait between both parties. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh, yeah, this is not an uncommon thing. The big thing is that the new tax plan puts so much money into corporations through corporate taxes that recently have been record highs in how much they've had.
Yep.
That's the reason why they're saying the market would be lower, because of the recent. But they've always, whenever there was a surplus, they buy back their own shares. But this is the first time, though, it's basically been across the board. Everybody gets to do it. Yeah.
Then, which then kind of leads me to say, well, do you honestly think Trump or any of Trump's advisors honestly looked that far into it? Is this a tactical plan that they decided they wanted to do? Because again, if you think about it, right, Trump's goal isn't just to get in office. His goal is to be in office for 8 years. His goal is to, create some sort of a legacy. He might even have a goal to try and be in office for 12 years. I don't know. That's a whole different discussion. But the difference becomes, though, right, is that do you think that this was a strategic plan to allow for the economy to continue to, A, sustain itself, and B, to increase inflated without actually doing too much? Because if you think about it, this is short-sighted. This is a very short-sighted method. Yeah. B, this only helps less than 10% of the population. And I'm going to wager that if we really truly looked at numbers, we'd be looking at less than 3% of the population truly benefits from this in any way, shape, or form. So do you honestly think that this is a Trump and his cronies a setup? Or is this something that kind of just happened and fell into their laps and they ran with it?
I'm going to guess it's a little bit of ignorance. So this kind of concept, this economic policy, really is something that these guys, the Republicans and all the advisors that Trump have been saying is a real thing for a long, long time. They've been saying that this actually works. And so this is essentially a chance for them to redo history. The Bush tax plan and the Reagan tax plan. These all basically did the same thing. So we saw a major windfall at the top end of the spectrum, and in the end, we did not see a benefit to the middle class and the people that were dealing with the income inequality. So there are people who probably honestly really do think that trickle down works. I personally think what this is that Donald Trump is looking to boost the economy as fast as possible. And so one of the best ways to do that is just to fill the economy with an influx of cash. Everybody knows that when you give the middle class money, they spend it and it boosts the economy. But Donald Trump and his administration isn't representative of that group. So my thought is that they are putting Wall Street, they're dipping a little cocaine in their Manhattans, right? So they're giving a little bit of speed to the economy, saying that they're going to be able to hit that 3, 4, 5, 6% growth. And the way you do that is by doing a massive influx of cash into the corporate sector. The corporate sector is going to see all this. They're going to take all this money and they're going to do all the things that benefit them and to make them look good. But with any really strong stimulant, there's always the down. You're going to have the downer. They're going to have the loss of that high. And in the near future, because we're at the end of the 10-year period of stable but slow growth, the people at the top who want 20, 30% return on their investments, people like Donald Trump who are big bang deal makers, like they don't, they're not happy with 2% growth. They're not happy with steady income that helps the whole country start looking a little better, even though I will argue that the Obama 2% advancement did not help the middle class as much as a lot of people in the Democratic Party claim. But this is a way to supercharge it and make yourself look good. So you went from 2% to 3, 4%. And there's a couple places where it hit 4%, a couple of real hot market quarters. But in the end, they're trying to supercharge the economy to try to get as much as they possibly can out of it. And I think that they're betting on that to get them another 4 years in office. Because in the end, I don't think that they honestly think that the long term on this is going to be as bad as they think it is. Like we saw Bush tax cuts and Reagan tax cuts, and they did not see the economic downturns that they were causing, because we didn't know what the bubble was. We didn't know what the tipping point was, as Malcolm Gladwell would like to say. But we don't know what the next one will be. But history is an angry mistress, and I would think that something is going to start something in the near future, and Trump is just trying to make it happen in a second term if it does. And this is a good way to just kind of supercharge it so that everybody has a bunch of money, and then when you get off that high, hopefully it'll be after 2020. I don't know if that's going to last that long. We've seen fluctuations in the market recently that tariffs and trade wars have been causing. So we'll see what happens. But this year, this is a predictable outcome, and whether or not this is what they planned on is it's up to debate. I can't know what's inside Trump's head.
Exactly. And it's kind of funny because Mark Rubio, of all people, sent a series of tweets, right? And he was talking about, I don't know, he was talking about, basically the tax code engineering the economy in favor of inflating prices of shares. But then he immediately trounces, the whole thing by saying, but this is at the expense of future productivity and job creation, which I agree 100% because if an organization invests their extra tax dollars not in people, in salaries, not in job creation, not in expansion, not in fighting and changing where they're going to put their money, and they use it to buy back stocks, it'll benefit them, in the interim, but it's not a good long-term plan. So what'll happen is, think about an organization that manufactures outside the U.S. Now all of a sudden these tariffs are going to hit. They may have made a ton of money right now, especially for their shareholders and especially for anybody inside of the company that owns shares, right? Which is what they want to do. The difference is if people don't cash out, once these tariffs hit and their prices go up, they're going to not be able to sell their product as easy, and their share value is going to drop. And so this is a very short, in my opinion, this is a very short-sighted, inflation that companies are doing. And I'm very surprised. And this is where, right here, this is where we need somebody, a business expert, man. We need somebody that's got more experience than me, working for a very large organization to say, hey, why did their company specifically do this? Because if you think about it, if you don't buy back the shares, but you reinvested that money in manufacturing inside of the U.S., based on what Trump's doing with tariffs, and this is a whole nother conversation we didn't even plan on having, but, what is Trump doing right now? It almost feels like Trump is making us an isolationist country. We're going to be an isolationist state inside of the world, right? Because he's isolating, all of our allies. He's isolating some non-allies, but people that we spend a lot of money with, that we owe a lot of money to. And now he's looking to do the same thing in Mexico. And if he does the same thing with terrorists in Mexico, there's a lot of our companies inside of our United States that utilize Mexican labor, which they shouldn't do, but they do that. And they utilize all this labor and all this cheap production. And he's going to tariff the heck out of that. So he's going to force companies to come back in and produce. And so he's going to literally, in my opinion, he's setting himself up, whether he knows it or not, to essentially create a collapsed Soviet Union inside of the United States that claims to be a capitalist model, because he's going to force us to bring everything back into the United States, and then we're not going to be able to do it as cheap as other countries, and other countries are going to start isolating us, and next thing you know, we're not going to get iPhones. Apple's going to be like, yeah, we make just as much money outside. You want to tax it? Okay, fine. An iPhone's going to cost $2,000 inside of the United States, and if you go to Europe, it's going to be $100. And it's insane for anybody to think that he's not creating an isolationist state inside of the United States. And what does that do? This right here, and then maybe I'm just crazy, but this plan right here helps further that agenda.
Yeah, it could definitely do some, destabilization. Kind of like it'll get rid of an insurance capabilities that these companies would have. You know what I mean? Like they could spend that money essentially doubling the redundancy, expanding. When you look at your stock portfolio, let's say you have a windfall and you invest back in yourself, you invest back into one single thing, one single entity, and then the market has a crash. You're not diversified enough to survive the next crash. Crashes always come back. The economy is a cyclic thing. The entire world is having this weird geopolitical recession. There's all kinds of weird things that are happening when it comes to capitalism kind of reverting back to a small scale with countries and large companies kind of pulling, clutching at their pearls. And this is the idea of self-interest being a primary tenet of capitalism is very true. And while our political markets are all doing all of these things where it's kind of self-interest, what can I do to help myself? The altruistic nature of a global economy where everybody kind of has a piece and a part, that is that's going to be hurt by these kinds of policies, because if that money, if the actual idea of stock, or not so much stock, but tax breaks would drive companies to invest and grow, we would see these investments into some really strong and new areas. Really, the only thing I've seen any investment in recently is warehousing, so that we can get our stuff in 1 to 2 days because of the Amazon and Walmart 1-day guarantee that's going to be starting up real soon. But in the long run, when it comes to like actual strong benefits in building the middle class economy, this stock buyback stuff, the people at the top and the people who have a lot of money are hiding behind these real big numbers on Wall Street. But like the movie Fight Club and like the book Fight Club likes to say, is that that's all just digital. And if something happens that, let's say, not so much destroys all of the digital servers or whatever, because there's so many redundancies that's not really possible anymore. But let's just say something happens where all that digital money, all that fake money comes to a head and something big happens. Like all this stuff that we're doing here, none of this is real. None of this is strong enough that could help keep the people in this country alive and happy and having a high quality of life. So like the stock buybacks is people investing their digital money back into digital stuff and just amassing all of that wealth into really small sectors. And it's not what all of the Republicans said would happen. is a direct opposite of that. So like that's the reason why this is a big deal, is that we're seeing the economic growth that everybody's claiming, but in real world it's just like with unemployment, that there's an unemployment rate and then there's the real unemployment rate, and the real unemployment rate is always worse than the claimed unemployment rate, because we just simply don't count some people. Well, if you don't count the BS and the things that are happening in the economy, you can always have a sunny side. But I don't think it's the best thing in the world to be an optimist on all topics. And this is one where sometimes you need to be a pessimist. Sometimes the glass needs to be half empty.
Yeah, enough with the taxes. I think it's time. It's time for some science, man. We haven't done science in a while.
No.
It's science
Yes.
time.
I don't know. I think it's science time. I don't know about
It's
you,
science time.
but I think it's definitely science time. So, Hannah, what's the science article that you brought tonight? Because I did not have one at all for this. And you sent me this, and the first thing I did, literally, just so you know, the first thing I did was delete it, essentially. I said, extraterrestrials, boom, I'm out. And then I was like, all right, I should probably go back and read it. I've never heard of the sciencealert.com, so like the first thing I thought of is that this has to be some sort of like a woo-woo type thing. But after reading through it, I feel a little bit better about this, and it technically comes from a popular molecular biophysics paper inside of France.
Yeah, that's the reason why I consider it to be something relatively, reliable. The New Scientist magazine blog is essentially the main reporter in here. But what the whole situation is that traces of extraterrestrial organic matter have been found in South Africa's mountains. Now, that's a statement of fact. And I would say this is more likely a probability is higher than what we would have initially suspected. So in that area in South Africa's mountains, there are some of the oldest rocks on the planet. And what they're looking in volcanic sediment over 3.3 billion years old, which is really old considering that the Earth was still a molten lava roughly 4.7 billion years ago. And I can't remember when it cooled to the point where there was actual stone, but it was really close to that 3.3 billion years. So this is some of the oldest stuff that would formed into a rock at the time. I don't know. It's what their thing is. There's lots of extraterrestrial. So it's kind of hard to say extraterrestrial material when the whole process of the Earth forming was just still like mush and mash, and there was so many things still in the general area hitting the Earth because it was just everything hadn't been absorbed by the gravity well that is the planet at that point. So there was tons of stuff just bang, 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 bang. And so what they're looking at is evidence for extraterrestrial carbon on terrestrial rocks. And so this is, it's important to think of organic material and molecules and things of that nature forming in other places. So evolution itself and physics say that these things are not uncommon. If you look at the scope of infinity, which would be the entire universe. So like, this isn't something that you would not expect to happen a lot, is the origin of life and organic compounds, stuff like that. But the fact that we potentially could see some of this stuff that it could potentially be organic matter formed somewhere else that made its way onto our planet. This would be important because it could increase the probability that organic materials form relatively spontaneously, probabilistically, on other planets that are maybe not as unique as ours. They may not actually get to the life stage, but these could be important, building blocks and molecules. But also, if we went to a planet that had the organic materials on it, that's something that we can use as a building block for terraforming and that kind of thing. So the volcanic deposit they're looking at here, it's called Joseph Cell Shirt. It's part of the Makonzwa mountain region, and a West Eleanor team uncovered a 2 millimeter thick rock characterized by two anomalous signals. They use electron paramagnetic resonance spectroscopy, and the researchers found that 3.3 billion year old rock combined two types of insoluble organic matter, both which suggest extraterrestrial origins. The oldest extraterrestrial organic matter ever identified, no less. So they're using some of the most advanced technology we have for measuring, these types of things, and they found some stuff. They have some evidence, and there's a paper written for their findings, and this is pretty cool because this is not a conclusive. We'll see, like we would call this conclusive should the Nobel Committee make a call, but this kind of thing here is, this is a very, very important type of thing to be discovering. More attention and more studying, I think, in the near future, but this is some pretty cool stuff to read about.
Yeah, I think I have a question, kind of somewhat off topic, but you know what the crappy thing is? The first thing, like I said earlier, the first thing I thought of was ancient aliens, right? Ancient aliens, and then I was like, okay, well, I'll come back and I'll look at this again, and it's very interesting to actually read through it. And the sad thing is extraterrestrial organic matter. Two words inside of there are things that, as skeptics, we immediately look at. Organic, right? And extraterrestrial. And I understand in this setting why it's necessary to say or use those. I get that. I agree with that. I understand the logic behind it. The problem I have, though, is because society has readapted all of those terms.
Yeah.
What do we do, right? So how do you help people get past the extraterrestrial, thing?
Well, extraterrestrial in this specific case is so what it is the anomalous reading that they found is suggestive of nanoparticles of nickel, chromium, and iron. So these nanoparticles of those three things are not something that's usually seen in terrestrial rock formations. So this conglomerate of materials, this nanoparticle with those three components in it, is not usually found on Earth. And it's very rare. So this piece is, it suggests, it strengthens the argument that parts of this thin rock layer originally came from somewhere much, much further away, using different physical pressures and things that are not really common to Earth, common to our solar system, and common to nearby objects. So nickel-rich chrome spinels, also referred to as cosmic spinels, are formed during the entry of extraterrestrial objects in Earth's atmosphere. The first author of the new research, chemical engineer Didier Guerrier from PSL Research University, explained last year. So how these two different but contradictory EPR signals could exist within the same shirt at the moment of history in the research team is it's hard to know for sure. So that's the whole point here. Is there are multiple things that are happening. There's people that are reading some stuff, and it's difficult to figure out exactly what's going on. But they have evidence that this could be potentially extraterrestrial organic matter. And so what that means, the extraterrestrial section, is not ET. This is not, this isn't Fox Mulder and Dana Scully running through a dark government corridor somewhere. This is potentially a kind of molecule and a kind of nanoparticle that isn't commonly found on Earth. And it's evidence to say that rock, that stone, that thing came from somewhere else, which if you do the math, almost everything on Earth came from somewhere else because all of the heavy elements have to be formed in the nucleus of stars as they're dying. But when it comes to rock formation and things that's seen on Earth, it's hard to find those kinds of organic matter spinal particles that low in the sedimentary layer, so that high up. So that makes it look like it came from somewhere else, which is really cool. This is something that these kinds of organic compounds and these kind of organic matter, excuse me, if it's found relatively shallow on the surface, could mean that this stuff is not that uncommon, and so that organic compounds could exist relatively commonly in the universe. And if that's the case, then there's a lot more material for the biological evolutionary aspects of life to start. All of this stuff is just evidence to kind of help us realize whether or not the Fermi paradox of, the universe is so big that it's possible life has formed a bunch of times, but the universe is so big that we literally probably could never actually get to one another because it's so far apart, and the odds of it happening, of life forming, is so rare that it ever gets to the intelligent stage. All of this stuff is, these are all these postulations, and this could be a little bit more evidence to say that, what, life may actually be more common, that organic matter may be a little bit more common in the universe, and really the only place we can find that is either on Earth or on the moon, and maybe a little bit on Mars, but we'd have to really plan ahead for that. So this is cool evidence right here in our backyard.
Yeah.
Africa, so to speak.
I mean, and if you think about it, what's the, understanding this and seeing this happen, to me, it's not about how I can get to another planet to live or how we're going to survive, because I think we all have finite lives, no matter which way we look at it.
We're not going to be alive when they colonize Mars.
Yeah, and even if we are,
if they do, you and I aren't going to be on the ship. We'll be too old.
They're going to be like, yeah, you're 90 years old. You're not coming. We do not want you to come. Be like, I can still procreate. And we're like, we don't care. We don't give a shit.
They'll put us in the Bender suicide booth and be like, good luck, guys. You guys can.
Exactly. Put your quarter in, pull it out again, right? But, that's the thing here, right? Is, for me, the exciting thing, though, is that this kind of, to some extent, shows that what we have is not this big unique thing. This is not a God-driven thing. And I guess maybe this is less political and a little bit more religious-based discussion. But, for me, the big thing is that a lot of people want to believe that. And I think if we could put more people in a reality setting, you're going to get two things. One, I'm hoping that empathy and morality of where we're at went out, and more people will be like, all right, we don't have specific religious beliefs we have to follow, therefore we can create a more humanistic world that for the little bit of time we have left, we're able to deal with it. On the other hand, we could go the opposite way, right? Where people get really selfish and they're like, well, screw it. I'm only here for 70 years. I'm going to do whatever the heck I want. I don't care what anybody else does. There's no repercussion. There's always that gimmick. But I'm hoping we're at the point where we're past all of that, to the point where we don't have to worry about that. And we can enjoy and try and make life better for the next person who isn't going to go to heaven, who isn't going to live for 2 million years, who isn't going to ever, be able to get outside of their little bubble. And they're actually going to be able to enjoy the short time span they have on this planet, because we understand there's other things out there similar or like us to some extent.
As long as we teach our kids these discoveries, I guess. I mean, for the short term, we don't know we don't know how long our next generation or next couple generations will live. This is just a step forward in the right direction. This may all be just a false negative. This could be something that's just like, oh, you know what, we figured this out, and it's not really what we think it is. And science is fine with that. I'm not going to invest so much in it that it'll destroy me. But these kinds of discoveries are just another step forward that could be one step forward and then 2 steps back, or it could be 5 steps forward and in a direct link that could be taking us to the point where we are able to span the entirety of the solar system, because this organic matter would be a useful way of gathering energy and traveling the solar system, even leaving the solar system and going towards Alpha Centauri or something. There's all kinds of really cool things that could be happening as far as the science and the physics and whatever. And this does nothing to retard that evolution. So if our kids don't live 150 years, maybe their kids will live 150 years, and then maybe we'll bypass the whole organic model. I don't know, but this discovery won't hurt that. That's all I'm saying.
Exactly. Oh, well, that was our science time for this week. I don't know what else to say. That was fun. We haven't done this is a lot more deep dive science segment than we've done in a while. So
it's fun stuff. I mean, just sometimes it takes some of the burn off of the politico.
Exactly. Well, if you hadn't figured it out, I mean, we essentially we were recording an episode ahead, so we're a little behind on the times. But the last segment for tonight, we have to talk about Mueller. I'm sorry. Like, we cannot get away from this. We cannot bypass this. We cannot do anything without having this conversation, because I think there's so much to unpack. And I honestly think it's a very very, very important conversation. So, I don't know what you've heard, but I think I really do think this is a good conversation, only because of the fact that, again, like I said earlier, there's a lot to unpack with this, right? Mueller stepped down. He has officially stepped down. Now, in fairness, he's definitely an older individual. He definitely deserves retirement at this point. But for Christ's sake, he's stepping down from one of the prominent investigations into, Trump's presidency.
I think he pretty much did what he was supposed to do, though. It's like, what would he have done past that? Like, they wanted him to do the investigation. He completed his investigation, and he stepped down because he was done. He was retired before this. I suspected that as soon as he released his report, he would have just simply said, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm going to go back to my ranch and, do whatever. So this is kind of what I expected. What did you think he would do besides just give his report and
I don't know.
I
thought he would continue to work.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I didn't know how old he was, honestly.
When he finished his directorship, he was done. He was retired. They brought him back because he was, a really reliable and really trustworthy guy. Acted as a nonpartisan in for the FBI. So, he's just a reliable fella, even though he was considered a conservative or relatively a Republican. But I guess his partisanship and his political perspective never really made a huge difference in a lot of his perspective and what people saw. But in all reality, to me, unpacking this it's unpacking the exact same thing that we had to unpack about his report. His entire speech and everything he said was essentially, I wrote everything in the speech. I wrote everything in the summaries. Please go read them. I mean, it's kind of, begging the American people to do something that they'll never do, because the American people will never sit down and read something 400 pages long that is essentially a textbook, a lab report. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
This will never happen. The people will always have to rely on a summary, and it'll come from the source that they pick. And all sources nowadays come from a cheese filter that filters out what you don't want, and it gets pumped into your social media bubble. So I have a hard time believing that what he was doing was anything than pandering to a time that's gone in this country.
Yeah, I don't know. And I agree with you. I mean, I don't know. I guess again, I'm a little concerned with him stepping down. But there were some interesting things. Did you listen to his speech at all?
Pieces of it. Once again, I've been going bonkers. So what I pretty much heard was the highlight reel of him essentially saying things that were just confirming what he had written in his report, and pretty much saying that it's up to Congress now. It is, I did what I could, and it was not in my purview to indict the president or press charges against the president, because that is it's not considered a thing that is able to do legally. So he said the limit of his abilities, the limit of all of what he would be able to do, is essentially put together a report, and Congress would have to make the decision on. So indicting a president is not something that's possible. They believe under current judicial setups. So that Mueller's perspective was essentially that I'm going to give everything I have, and I could not say that the president did not commit a crime, and so all of the evidence I have is up to the legislative branch to do their regulatory abilities and figure out what the hell is going on.
Yeah. Well, here's a portion I think was very, very interesting. I want to play you a small clip from this.
Okay.
The indictment alleges that they used sophisticated cyber techniques to hack into computers and networks used by the Clinton campaign. They stole private information and then released that information through fake online identities and through the organization WikiLeaks. The releases were designed and timed to interfere with our election and to damage a presidential candidate. And at the same time, as the grand jury alleged in a separate indictment, a private Russian entity engaged in a social media operation where Russian citizens posed as Americans in order to influence an election. These indictments can.
So I'm going to pause right there because what I find interesting as we unpack this is he literally is calling out. He's calling out the specific forces inside of Russia, right? He's calling out the meddling in the elections. And again, whether this is Trump's fault or not, right? He's literally telling you there was meddling inside of the elections. Here's the reason or some of the things why or how it happened, right? That's important in my opinion, right? It's important because they specifically are calling out, issues within the issues within the election. So, I think as we unpack this, we have to recognize that portion of it, Hanna, because without that, there's nothing. So even if Mueller can't, inundate or force Trump or have all those conversations, I think that's an important piece because what's the one thing I've seen every single GOP Trump supporter on my page do? Basically say, Mueller couldn't, vindicated, Trump's vindicated, Mueller couldn't do anything, blah, blah, blah. But hold on, whether Trump's innocent or not is a different question. The bigger question is there was meddling. This did affect society. And if we don't actually understand that, what are we going to do? Right? I mean, we got an election coming up in a year and a half, man. What are we doing to prevent this? And so, even if you and I, probably believe Trump has some indication in this, we could talk about that later. But what is he going to do to stop this? Because in fairness, this is the big thing for me. If you, as a political, liaison for me, are not actually actively working to stop this because it helped you in your favor, I mean, I'm sorry, screw you, dude, because this is BS. You should be actively working to stop this, knowing that was at least discovered. So this is not some blow-off thing. This is not something where we can go, oh, Trump's vindicated, let's all move on. No. You want to believe that? I'll give you that and move on with my life in that aspect. But I want to have a conversation about what the fuck's going to be done to fix this. And I excuse my language here because this is a soapbox for me to some extent. But I mean, come on, what are we going to do to fix this? And why is the GOP and the president not worried about this? And why would we ever elect another official that allows that? Every person that has no interest in solving this problem should not be elected the next term, no matter what. I'm sorry. Like, that's a violation of democracy right there.
I agree entirely. So what we have to worry about really is the fact that there is not going to be any. So back to my initial comment when you asked, what have I heard? I made the same mistake that every single other person in reporting and everything else that I've been hearing about this is that we only talk about part 2 of Mueller's report. And part 1 says that there was extra terrestrial. There was foreign nationals that got into our election systems, and there were actually some compromises that were made. Some of the systems were accessed, and there is, without question, there was some meddling. There was some manipulations that happened there. They didn't say anything that direct vote numbers were changed. I didn't see any evidence of that, and I haven't heard any reporting of that where they went into the electronics and they changed who voted for what. But let's face it, during the past presidential elections, when it comes to George W. Bush winning over Gore, there were questions about uncheckable ballots and unauditable voting systems, the digital systems. And, everybody's been saying we should go back to paper for everyone all over this country, 100%. Yes, it's cumbersome and expensive, but there's one thing that's nice. And a couple of people that we've interviewed over the years have said this, that are fans of this, is that you can't I mean, you potentially could destroy paper ballots, and you possibly could fabricate some, but in all reality, it's not nearly as easy to do as it is to manipulate code or break into systems, because let's face it, there is no really secure computer system. So what are we doing to change this? So the first portion of Mueller's report says, yes, there were things that were done to this country by outside forces. We had the leader of the Senate. It's his job to be in charge of the legislative agenda. And Mitch McConnell has said that there will be no votes being brought to the floor for this year for election security. None. It's since 2016 we had the election, and there were questions. The Mueller report came out, which was specifically designed to find whether or not there was meddling. The obstruction of justice thing kind of came into play once the Mueller report was put into place, and the president basically tried to kill it. But the Mueller report wasn't initially instated to look into obstruction of justice. That obstruction basically happened because the Mueller report existed, and just because Trump didn't want anyone to know, or didn't want there to be any acknowledgement that there were other forces that were supporting him, and it wasn't all just his amazing bravado and charisma that brought this thing to a head. There were other forces and conservative forces that were involved here, and Mueller confirmed that to a certain degree. And, this is a very important thing that we need to look at our election security. We need to make sure that's going on. And McConnell has basically said there will be no election security bills brought to ahead at least this year. And so I don't know if anything will show up in 2020, but it's kind of late at that point. There's all kinds of really important things that could be happening for security and whatever. And it doesn't seem like the Republicans are at all concerned with that. And then it brings up the point you just mentioned. It's like, well, just because it benefited you, is there a reason why you're not doing this? Because in most cases, the idea of a Republican liking another country manipulating the election doesn't sound like something they would like.
No, I guess the one thing I always get hung up on is everybody was so upset with Mueller, right? People were like, "Oh, screw Mueller. He's a leftist. He's pushing a leftist agenda. It's a progressive, plans." But he wasn't. That dude was not. That dude is definitely not the guy that I would have, picked. I mean, I will agree he's been a pretty conservative, fair person, but he's not the guy. If I wanted to try and rig this, he's not the guy I would have picked. I'm sorry. He's not.
He was appointed by a Republican. He was appointed by Rod Rosenstein, who was appointed by Mitch McConnell and the Senate, who confirmed after Trump appointed. I mean, all of these things are all Republican pieces that are all appointed and confirmed and sent through the system. And Mueller's the guy that was picked after Jeff Sessions recused himself. Like, this is the Republican machine that picked Bob Mueller to do this. And basically Trump is looking for people who are, yes men who will pledge loyalty. And Rod Rosenstein, he's been sticking with Mueller and his report, because Mueller's report isn't incredibly biased either way. I mean, in all reality, it may not be the answer that a bunch of Democrats and progressive really wanted, but I to be honest with you, I honestly think this is probably the most truthful one.
Yeah. And I'll concede that point, right? Like, I'll concede that as a, I'll concede that as a point, for this. The problem I have, again, against it is when we talk about, what's happening and what's going on and all these other different things, and we talk about putting a very conservative individual into that position. He made some fair points. He removed a lot of biases I would have said could have been placed in there. And a lot of people are trying to pin that on him. And that's, in my opinion, that's wrong. It's because they don't like what came out of this. They don't like what the conversations were had. And if you listen to the Mueller interview, if you listen to, what he's saying, he's being honest with you to some extent. He's just saying, hey, here it is. I'm just going to lay it on the table. Do with it what you want.
Yeah, well, this is what we always talk about, is that you and I are interested in the most truth, right? As skeptical people, we want the most true thing to be our guide, even if it isn't the one we want. That's what we want. We want the most truth. And I honestly think that Mueller put together a very honest and very truthful thing. It may not be exactly what I wanted. I mean, if you asked me what I wanted, I would say I wanted him to come out running around in his underwear saying Trump stole his clothes and he's trying to kill everyone. You know what I mean? Like, just like something absurd and insane, and would completely indict Trump, and they would haul him off to the gulag and, you know, get rid of this horrible, horrible capitalist monster that we created. That's not the case. It's something in between that everyone kind of has a problem with, and everyone kind of have something they like about. It just there's no happy here. This is the biggest, grayest answer ever.
Yeah. And I don't know, there's a lot of articles going around saying that this is not the end of this case. And I don't know.
Not. The Senate has a whole bunch of work to do. The House has tons of regulatory stuff. And there's battles that are going to be happening with the judicial, whether or not the House can subpoena all of these people and all of this information they want. So, I mean, we got 2 years.
But is it worth it, though, man? Is that worth it? Like,
it is.
Okay, hold on.
That's the questions.
I'm going to ask you, do you really think it's worth it? Because to me, one of the big things should be is how do we stop this in the future? And I agree with you. Trump is an awful individual.
Yes, he's so bad.
He's done so many horrible, unmoral things, but we have to look at a larger picture. And maybe that's a privileged position in my behalf. And I'll admit that I come from a privileged position, but we have to at least look at what's the bigger picture here. Is the bigger picture to try and indict Trump? Is the bigger picture trying to impeach Trump? What is that going to do for anything for the elections? And are we willing to roll the dice, kind of like in Star Wars Destiny? Are we willing to roll the dice to say, hey, let's try and impeach him because we don't, will that harm his future candidacy for next, in the year and a half? Or will it harm us trying to go after him? And my bigger thing is how do we just stop the meddling? How do we stop this and say enough's enough? Can't we at least be bipartisan in this? And I'm not saying we should go after WikiLeaks, which I have a love-hate relationship with, but, why can we not stop at least at minimum, some of this interference and say, you know what, whether you're part of it or not, it doesn't matter. Let's stop the interference. Let's find a way to fix that portion of it. And then let's come back to the public and say, do we really want to go after Trump or not? Because in my personal opinion, the next year would be better spent putting legislation in place, even if it's bipartisan. It's better to put that in place to stop the rigging and the interference that we got from 2016 for future elections, even if we do lose in 2020, which I hate saying that. Yeah. And it makes me feel, I feel really disgusting right now. Like, just saying that makes me want to, take a bowl and throw it on the ground and say, that's what I feel. But I feel for democracy's sake, it's so much better to not violate the system and to find a happy medium to stop some of the awful things that came out. And before you respond, I'm going to give you a quick example, and I'm going to relate it back to that stupid card game that I play, right? There's certain things inside of this card game where somebody creates this card, and then people figure out how to cheat this card, and it becomes overpowered. And then what happens is people petition the creators of the card and in this game to say, hey, stop doing this. What are we going to do about it? And if you look at any other card type games, you see this, like Magic the Gathering, for example. They put ban lists in tournaments. They do all these different things to stop that. They don't just say you can't play it. If you want to play it for fun, great. But let's stop this because we made a mistake. All I'm saying is that why would we not focus on that specifically right now versus focusing on going after Trump?
Yeah, essentially the question is, this is the $10 billion question, right? Or $2 billion, $3 billion, what their the projected spending for the next general election is going to be. Anyways, the question is whether or not Pelosi's perspective is correct, or let's say Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's perspective is correct. So essentially, she is much more progressive, much more vigilant, much more, intent on making change, hard, blood on the floor. Or the Pelosi perspective, where she's like, listen, this has been done before. We watched the Republicans indict or attempt to impeach President Clinton, and Clinton essentially played his game. He played it right, and he concentrated on the people the entire time the Republicans were working as hard and steadfast as they could to remove the president. And they could not eventually they impeached him in the House. They could not remove him in the Senate. And what was expected to be a difficult win actually turned out to be a relatively easy win for his second term. So the question is whether or not Pelosi and Schumer are willing to go down that road of impeachment, because they're essentially going to be supercharging the base, right? They're going to supercharge Trump's base, which is already, let's face it, they're willing to buy these stupid hats and buy these crazy outfits and do all this stuff like that. I mean, these are bandwagon people that are there. That I've seen tattoos. This is not, a passing political fad. So this is something you have to treat seriously. So the question is, in all reality, do we have enough legitimate information here? Is there enough, without question, Trump bravado that was just, I can do whatever I want and I'm going to do this, that is impeachable? I think in past presidencies, for someone to do like what he did, it might be. But since he is where he is and who he is and the outsider status that he has and the ignorance that he's able to play, saying like, I'm new to this game, I didn't know what this was, I just had a meeting with the Russians, no big deal, like all that kind of stuff is, it's not a winning game. And I don't think the Democrats can win it. I don't think that there's any way that they could ever find some bipartisan way to actually remove the president, because to me that is the requirement. If you are going to impeach, if you're going to do the impeachment proceedings, you actually have to have something so strong that you would be able to marshal enough support in the Senate to remove the president. Otherwise, I think it's a bad political decision to make that. And I think what you have suggested, working on shoring up all the election systems, all the political systems, making sure gerrymandering is the number one thing that we concentrate on, fighting as best we can to make sure the census goes as is expected and would be the most, accurate and constructive census we can possibly have. Because let's say the census goes exactly the way the Republicans want, we're going to get districts and gerrymandering, and we're going to get funding that's going to be so heavily funded and so uneven towards the Republican base compared to the people throughout the country that actually exist and the census is supposed to measure. So there's all kinds of really important things, from election security to census stuff, that I think is a better bet for the Democrats to rock and roll on. And this is a great example of Mueller basically gave us what is the most dangerous thing here. The Trump he's a jerk who tries to skirt the law. He's always done that. He's always cheated the system. He's always done that. This is not a surprise. But the Russians made a serious bid to change what we had. That is something that really affects our democracy, and that should be what we concentrate on. I think a lot of the Democrats like this, but we're in an election cycle, so people that are trying to catch that hardcore progressive base and the people that are really, really hard. Like, I would potentially be a hard progressive. I don't know if I would support the full-fledged starting the impeachment proceedings or impeachment investigations that Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris and some of the other, I think Cory Booker also said that he likes the idea of just starting those investigations. Like, these are things that are dangerous when it comes to watching what happened to Clinton when the Republicans attacked him so hard and he won another term. I would, like you said, I would be so sad. And I don't know if I would be as surprised as when Trump won, but it would be a sad time, because I cannot imagine with a second term, without having to worry about re-election, that the Trump administration would be able to start and do.
Yeah, I would be sad. I'm not surprised if the Democrats, try and go down that avenue. I disagree with it, but I'm not surprised if they do. I don't know. I agree with you. It's how do we move forward and create the most amount of good? And I do agree.
Well, I'm thinking long term.
I do agree if Trump gets, in again, or it looks like it, let's create anarchy. Screw it. At this point, I mean, at this point, let's tear the system down.
It might actually be close to that. If Trump wins another presidency, we could see de-evolution at a I don't know if there's a de-evolution version of the Democratic scale, but like we're talking potential plutocracy. I mean, this is
It could.
I hate slippery slopes, but it just feels right.
Yeah. Well, the sooner we get him out, the less of a threat any of that becomes. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
as we conclude the episode, we always
Yes.
give our quick saves of the week. This week, my quick save is an article, and I'll be honest, I can't tell you this is some big truly existent thing, or this is exactly what somebody wanted to create it. But essentially, there is this bust that was created 2,500 years ago called Kamazotas, right? And it's essentially some ancient god that had the body of a person and the head of a bat. And the funniest thing about this, and this is literally like when I saw this article come across, I saved it and I was like, I have to have this conversation because Batman is my favorite, superhero for the most part. And it's sad because A, he's white, right? And B, he's a rich millionaire, but he always wants to do good and he spends lots of money fighting his own resources. Like, he actively goes against the corporation that funds him to do moral things. And when I saw this, and I saw this article that says basically the ancient Mayans worship something called a Batman god, I just said, like, if that we don't name the episode Batman God, I have to have this conversation because this is amazing. Like, I sent it to both my kids, I sent it to my brother. I was like, look at this. This is crazy. And, hashtag did the DC creators know about this and just not tell anybody?
So the question I've got is, so like there's two pictures here. There's the one that looks like it's a stone carving mask thing, and that is insanely close to the Batman costume. And then you scroll down a little further, and then there's like what appears to be a drawing diagram of like a giant critter dude with huge dong and balls and like a bat head thing going on. And so like did they that picture of that mask thing that looks like it's brass or some kind of aged stone or something, like that's really a real thing. If that's the case, that is insane how close that is to what we have as a Batman. That's crazy.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, they talk about it as it's basically two words from ancient Mayan, put together. One called Kami, which means death, and the other one is Sorts, which is bat. So death bat, right? And like, if you get into the Batman comics and you don't just watch just the movies, you understand that Batman isn't a vigilante that doesn't embrace violence to some extent at some point. I mean, it's not a big running theme. It's not like every comic book Batman goes out and kills people, but it's a discussion, and if you think about it, the idea between, having something that's of the night, that is of death, that is a sacrifice, that's very similar to a Bruce Wayne mythology that we've come to see.
Yeah. Well, when I saw Kame, I thought of the Kamehameha Dragon Ball.
That's true. That's true.
Anywho, no, that's really cool. I don't know. It's it's like it's like the humans are really good pattern creating creatures, and so like we see like all this, like wow, that's a thing. Then there's a new thing that's like this thing. But also that's freakishly similar to like what we created. So it makes me think of the idea of like the fact that there are so many humans that have similar gods and monotheistic gods or whatever. And you look at the human brain and what it's structured. It's like, is it really not possible that every society created a single god, eventually evolving to it? And then let's just hope, for the sake of argument here, that every major society also has their own Batman. How cool would that be?
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. Maybe Batman is God.
All Batmans. That would be the best thing ever. So I don't know. My quick save is really it's just a straightforward thing for me. This is comfort food. This is warmful and happiness and a slightly toasted marshmallow at a campfire. This is a YouTube video that has the entire Christopher Hitchens' God Is Not Great audiobook for people who are financially challenged, don't have a copy of it. Also, there's a limit to how long of a YouTube video that you can convert into MP3. I already tried it, can't do it unless you pay extra money to people, but you could, if you have paid service, you could convert this thing into an MP3 from the link included in the description. But if you just want to just throw a YouTube video on, because it does have the ability to keep track of where you were the last time you watched that video, you can listen to the entire God Is Not Great audiobook read to you by the great author Christopher Hitchens. And there's something about the cadence and the rhythm, the tone, and where the eccentric moments are in every one of these sentences, where he really concentrates on the syllables. It's delivered by the guy who wrote it in the way he wished to speak it is something that everyone should experience, and it's the best way to experience God Is Not Great. And I kind of bounced back and forth. I jumped on the my library, the Overdrive for Kentwood Library, and I listened to it the other day, and it's just a trip down memory lane, and it's something that just you miss his voice, but the YouTube videos and everything will keep him alive forever. But it's just a really, really nice thing to have for free on the internet, which I couldn't believe the entire audiobook was out there.
Exactly. I agree with you on that. It's fun, right? It's fun to do those things, and I'll be honest, I think we talk more about Christopher Hitchens than we probably should, but it's really hard to get past, some of the things that he brings to the table, right? He does bring a lot of apologist discussions to the table, and it's really hard to ignore it.
The charisma is a really important thing. I don't know if there is that much charisma anymore. Sam Harris doesn't have any charisma. He may have logic.
He's like a bean booker. He's like looking at a counter and paint drying. That's Sam Harris. Like, yep, you suck, dude.
Like, Dan Dennett is so great, but he's so old that he doesn't really do much anymore. And so, like, when you look at the guys that are known for being really big things, there's been a bunch of falling outs. Like Matt Dillahunty, I really haven't seen too many things that make him any kind of difficulty or issue through the community. But like, we've lost a few people who really made a big dent. And so like, Hitchens is going to be one that for me. And then Dawkins is getting pretty old, and when he sticks to his to actual talking of his science, his evolutionary biology that he's an actual expert in, he's great. When he gets off topic, he has a tendency to meander and be a little bit difficult, especially when he's talking about social political stuff. But Hitchens was just this swashbuckling atheist. He was the political commentator who actually went to the places that he was critiquing. So I don't know if that'll exist again. It's a pretty sweet thing. So like, getting a little piece of it here and there is something that I recommend. And and to be honest with you, it's really easy to critique him where critique was due, because he made a whole bunch of mistakes. He did atone for some of them, but in all reality, you can easily just say he was amazing, he was great, and also those things you thought sometimes, like invading Iraq, and that was a terrible idea. So like, I don't know. It's just take it with a grain of salt.
Exactly. Well, I think we've exhausted our time for tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us through episode 179. We love that you love the show. We love that you want to support the show. If you don't support us, head over to Patreon. If you do support us on Patreon and you've recently increased your donation, thank you so much. We love you so much for increasing your donation. We actually had a couple of Patreons who increased their donation twice over the course of the last 3 months. So thank you so much for doing that for us. With that being said, we're going to end the show on a positive note by saying we'll be back next week with another amazing episode. Maybe some Star Wars talk. Maybe not. Probably not. If you want to hear in on the pre-show, check us out on patreon.com. We have all of our pre-shows for every episode, plus unedited interviews, all on patreon.com, that you can get if you become a subscriber. And again, remember, we donate a portion of all the financial gains that we get, whether we can pay for the website or not, back to the public. Thank you again so much for joining us. We'll be back next week with another amazing episode of Cellar Door Skeptics.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker. CellarDoorSkeptics.com.
If you'd like to join the ranks of Patreons and sponsor the show, head over to patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics. For less than a 20-ounce soda or an energy drink each week, you can help sponsor us, the hosts, and our charity of choice. Patreon helps Cellar Door Skeptics create better content, become better activists, and it's going to help you stay healthier by drinking one less soda or one less energy drink each week. Click the link in the notes of the show to sponsor us today, because we bring the discussion with the sources.